Chapter 24. The scouts had spent the past 28 hours sweeping the system, and when they returned, they brought the report Admiral Pellaeon had been expecting. Except for the Chimera itself, the Pesiton system was about as deserted as a region of space could be. "Offhand, sir, I'd say you turned down your offer," Captain Ardif said, coming up beside Pellaeon on the Star Destroyer's command walkway. "Perhaps," Pellaeon said, gazing out the viewport at the stars. "It's also possible that my suggested timetable was a little optimistic. General Beliblis may be having difficulty convincing the New Republic hierarchy that it would be to their benefit to talk to me. Or else he's having trouble putting together a big enough combat force to take on an Imperial Star Destroyer," Ardif said ominously. "It strikes me that this could be a giant arachnid's web we're comfortably settling ourselves into the middle of." "Relax, Captain," Pellaeon soothed the younger man. For all his budding military capability, Ardif had a tendency to ramble over his own tongue when he was feeling nervous. "Beliblis is a man of honor. He wouldn't betray my invitation that way." "I seem to recall that he was also once a man of extreme ambition," Ardif countered. "And at the moment he looks to be getting lost among the swarm of other generals and admirals infesting the New Republic military. It could easily occur to an ambitious man that capturing you would drastically increase his visibility." Pellaeon smiled. "I'd like to believe that after all these years I could still be such a valuable prize," he said. "But I hardly think that to be the case." "You can be as modest as you want, Admiral," Ardif said, gazing uneasily out at the starlit sky. "But right now you're about the only thing that's holding the Empire together." Pellaeon gazed out at the stars. "Or the only chance we have of survival," he added quietly. "However you want to think about it, sir," Ardif said, a note of asperity creeping into his voice. "The point remains that Colonel Vermal went out to deliver your message and never returned. Why?" "I don't know," Pellaeon had to concede. "I take it you have a theory?" "Yes, sir. The same theory I've had since before we left Yaga Minor," Ardif said. "I think Vermal learned something, either from Beliblis directly or else he overheard something someone else said. That whatever he heard made it necessary for Beliblis to lock him up where we wouldn't communicate with you. That at best we're wasting our time, and that at worst we're walking into a trap." "It's still a worthwhile gamble, Captain," Pellaeon said quietly. "We'll give Beliblis a few days to show up. After that—" "Admiral Pellaeon?" the sensor officer called from the starboard crew pit. "Incoming ships, sir. Looks like 8 of them, coming in on vector 164 by 53. Pellaeon felt his throat tighten. "Identification?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "4 are Corellian gunships," another voice called. "The big one's a Kalath battlecruiser. Looks like it's been heavily modified. 3 are Telgorn pacifier-class assault boats. IDs? Inconclusive." "What do you mean, inconclusive?" Ardif demanded. "Their IDs don't match anything in the registry," the officer said. "I'm running an overlay check to see if I can unravel them." "Disguised ships," Ardif said darkly. "Smugglers use ID overlays too," Pellaeon reminded him. "So do pirates and some mercenary groups." "I know that, sir," Ardif said. "I also know that there's precious little in this system any of those groups could possibly want." "A point," Pellaeon admitted. "Communications officer, transmit our identification and ask for theirs." "Identification transmitted," the other said. "No response." "Incoming ships have changed course," the sensor officer called. "Now on intercept vector with the Chimera." Ardif hissed tensely between his teeth. "Steady, Captain," Pellaeon advised him. "Lieutenant, get me a full sensor scan of the incoming ships. Weapons capabilities and hull markings in particular." "Acknowledged, sir." "Admiral," another voice cut him off. "Incoming ships have reconfigured into attack formation." "I think, Admiral," Ardif said, his voice hard, "that we have Beliblis's answer." Pellaeon closed his left hand into a fist at his side. "Any hull markings, Lieutenant?" he called. "It's coming up now, sir." "Yes, sir, there are. The gunships are carrying Corellian Defense Force insignia. The others? The same, sir." "Thank you," Pellaeon murmured. He could feel Ardif's eyes on him and the heat of the other's anger and bitter vindication. "Captain, you'd best prepare the Chimera for combat." "Yes, sir." Ardif half turned towards the portside crew pit. All pilots to their fighters, he ordered. Ready to launch on my command. Deflector screens powered up, all turbo lasers energized and ready. And tractor beams, Pellaeon added quietly. Ardith threw him a puzzled glance. Sir? We may want to bring in one or more of the ships, Pellaeon explained. Or some of the battle debris. Ardith's lip twitched. Yes, sir. All tractor beams activate. Pellaeon took a few steps closer to the forward viewport, moving away from the heightened buzz of activity from the crew pits and aft bridge. Could that really be Bella Bliss out there, blazing towards the Chimera in full battle formation? No. Ridiculous. He'd never met Bella Bliss in person, but everything he'd ever read about the man indicated the strong sense of honor and dignity. A man like that wouldn't pull what was essentially a cowardly sneak attack, not in response to an honest request for parley. Even in Bella Bliss's losing battles against Grand Admiral Thrawn, he'd maintained that same dignity. His battles against Thrawn? Pellaeon smiled tightly. Yes, there it was. A way, perhaps, to find out whether or not that was really Bella Bliss leading that motley attack force out there. There was a movement of air at his side. It's possible he's just being cautious, Ardith said, the words coming out with obvious reluctance. The shield overlap that comes from an attack formation like that makes it useful for defense as well, and he may simply not want to transmit his identity until he's closer. Pellaeon eyed the young captain with mild surprise. You impress me, Captain, he said. One of the most important attributes of a good commander is the ability to think beyond his own expectations. I want to be fair, sir, Ardith said stiffly, but not at the risk of your ship. Do you want me to launch ties or prey birds? Not yet, Pellaeon said, looking back out the viewport. The incoming ships were visible now, tiny specks rapidly growing larger. Whatever happens here, I want it clear that we did nothing to provoke hostilities. For a long minute they stood together in silence and waited. The incoming ships grew steadily larger, and suddenly they were speeding low across the Chimera, raking the Star Destroyer's upper surface with a blaze of turbolaser fire. They pulled up, heading directly for the bridge. Someone in one of the crew pits behind Pellaeon yelped with surprise or fear. And then they were gone, branching to either side of the command superstructure and pulling for the safety of distance. Ardith let out a hissing breath. I think that proves their intentions, Admiral, he said. His earlier nervousness vanished into an icy professionalism. Request permission to attack. Permission granted, Pellaeon said, but with turbolasers only. Ardith gave him a sharp look. No fighters? Not yet, Pellaeon told him, searching the sky for the attackers. Probably still making their way around after that mad plunge aft. I have something else planned for the prey birds. Ardith threw a quick glance around them. Admiral, I respectfully urge you to reconsider, he said, his voice barely loud enough for Pellaeon to hear. That battlecruiser is packing some serious weaponry. It went by too fast this time to do any major damage, but that kind of skittishness isn't likely to last. If we don't use the fighters to keep them at arm's length, we'll just be begging for trouble. I understand your concerns, Captain, Pellaeon told him. The attackers had come around into sight now, distant specks swinging around almost leisurely for their second pass. But I had my reasons. Order turbolaser batteries to stand ready. He could see Ardith's throat working, but the captain merely gave him a curt nod. Turbolaser crews, stand ready, he called harshly. Trust me, Captain, Pellaeon murmured, trying hard not to smile as his mind suddenly flashed back 10 years. Then, he'd been the earnest captain standing on this same deck, trying in the most diplomatic way possible to make his superiors see sense in the middle of a tense combat situation. He'd had much more experience than Ardith, of course, but that had merely made his frustrations run that much deeper as he stood by helplessly and watched as the Chimera drove hard into certain disaster. And yet Thrawn had never reprimanded him for his impertinence or lack of understanding. He had merely continued calmly with his plans, allowing the results to speak for themselves. Pellaeon could only hope that the results of this plan would be even half so eloquent. The attackers had completed their circling and turned towards the Chimera. Here they come, the sensor officer called. Looks like they're going to do a crossways run this time. They're worried about running into the command superstructure, Pellaeon commented. That must mean one or more of their ships almost couldn't pull out in time on that last run. Or else they're simply going for variety, Ardith growled, frustration bubbling beneath the words. Again the memories flickered, and again Pellaeon carefully suppressed his smile. Right now, in the heat of combat, a smile would definitely not be something Ardif would understand. Stand by turbolasers, he said. Fire at will. The attackers swept towards them, weapons blazing. The Chimera's turbolasers answered, and for a few seconds the sky outside the bridge became a dazzling display of green and red fire. And then the attackers were gone, clawing again for distance, and the Star Destroyer's awesome weaponry fell silent. Damage? Pellaeon called. Minor damage only, the report came from the starboard crew pit. 3 turbolaser tracking systems in Quadrant 1 have been knocked out, and there are some minimal hull breaches along the forward ridge line. They've been sealed off. They're trying to knock out all the turbolasers in Quadrant 1, Ardif muttered. Once they do that, that battlecruiser can just sit off the bow and blast away at the hull. That does seem to be their intention, Pellaeon agreed. Damage to the enemy? Unknown, but probably minimal, the sensor officer reported. That overlapping shield configuration of theirs is pretty strong. Not easy to punch through. But it's primarily ray shielding? Pellaeon asked. Yes, sir. At least on the battlecruiser, the officer confirmed. The gunships also have some minimal particle shielding. We're not going to have much chance of hitting them with proton torpedoes, if that's what you're thinking, Ardif warned. In close, their angular speed is too high for the torpedoes to track, and at any real distance, they'll have all the time they need to target and destroy them. I understand the tactics involved, Pellaeon said mildly. Let's see if we can rewrite the script a bit. Colonel Bass, order 1 Praybird squadron to launch on my command. Their attack vector... He paused, following the attackers with his eyes. They had reached the farthest point of their curve now, and were starting to swing back around for another pass. Attack vector 2-3x7, he decided. They're to stay on that vector in tight parade flight formation until otherwise ordered. He could feel Ardif's eyes on him. Parade flight formation, sir, the captain echoed, clearly not believing his ears. The shield overlap will help protect them from enemy fire, Pellaeon explained. Not well enough, Ardif countered. Not against a Kaloth battlecruiser at close-in range. With any luck, they won't need to get that close, Pellaeon said. Just as with their last 2 runs, he saw, the attackers were coming straight in. Perfect. Colonel, launch fighter squadron. Acknowledged, Colonel Bass said. Fighters launched. Pellaeon turned back to the viewport. A few seconds later, the Praybirds appeared around the edge of the hull, a clump of close formation drive trails arrowing straight out towards the incoming attackers. Stand by number 8 proton torpedo cluster, he called. All 15 torpedoes to fire in 3x5 sequence along vector 2-3x7. The background hum in the bridge suddenly seemed to falter. Sir? The fire control officer asked hesitantly. That's the same vector as the Praybirds, Pellaeon finished for him. Yes, I know, Lieutenant. You have your orders. Yes, sir. Fire torpedoes on my command only, Pellaeon continued, watching the Praybirds streaking towards the incoming attackers. Almost there. Colonel Bass, order the Praybirds to perform a full-speed staggery blossom maneuver on my command. Lieutenant, fire proton torpedoes. Torpedoes fired, the other confirmed, and from beneath the Chimera's bow, a tight column of torpedo trails appeared, 5 groups of 3 torpedoes each, driving hard directly towards the now distant drive trails of the Praybirds. Abruptly, Ardif gave a small snort of understanding. Ah, of course. Indeed, Pellaeon agreed, watching the departing torpedoes closely, painfully aware of the slice-second timing that was required. Almost there. Colonel Bass, now! For a single agonizing heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with parade flight precision, the Praybirds broke out of their clustered formation. Turning sharply out and away from their original vector, they formed a brief stylized saggery flower shape as they curved back around towards the Chimera. The enemy turbolaser fire that had been pounding away at their overlap shields split in response, swinging outward to track each of the individual fighters. And with a flash of brilliant light, the first 3 proton torpedoes roared through the undefended center area, blazing their way directly between the 2 gunships in the lead, and impacted squarely against the bow of the battlecruiser. Even from the Chimera's distance, the consternation among the attacking ships was instantly apparent. Instantly apparent and utterly useless. Even as the bunched ships clawed desperately to get some distance between them, the second torpedo group hit, blowing out an impressive cloud of shattered hull metal and transparent steel. The third group must have run into a piece of the debris from the second blast, All three torpedoes blew prematurely, sending one of the dodging gunships corkscrewing violently into the night with a ruptured hull. By the time the last three torpedoes had spent their fury, the battle was over. The battle cruiser had been reduced to rubble, and the other ships were running for their lives. Brilliantly done, Admiral, Artif said, admiration and embarrassment mixing in his voice. I'm, sorry if I sounded. Understood, Captain, Pellaeon assured him. Believe it or not, I've been in your place myself. Thank you, sir. Artif gestured towards the glowing cloud of burning wreckage. Shall I send a team to retrieve some of the debris? It might be able to tell us who that was. Go ahead and send a team, Pellaeon said, but I can tell you right now that it wasn't General Bella Bliss. Really, Artif said, his eyes on Pellaeon as he gestured his order to the crew pit. Not questioning this time, but honestly curious. How can you be that sure? First things first, Pellaeon said. While the team is retrieving the debris, I want you to run the record of the battle through the predictor. It's still online, isn't it? Yes, sir, Artif said, smiling tightly with understanding. That's why you let them do that second run against us, isn't it? So that there would be enough data for the predictor to analyze. Exactly, Pellaeon said. It didn't work very well at figuring out the tactics of a given enemy. Let's see if it can work in reverse to figure out the enemy for the given tactics. If we're lucky, it may be able to give us at least a hint of who out there might favor this particular combat style. And you're sure it wasn't Bella Bliss? Pellaeon looked out at the glowing cloud. Have you ever heard of an A-Wing slash, Captain? I don't think so, sir. It's a New Republic battle technique, Pellaeon said, turning back to face him. It requires highly precise timing, which is why it's hardly ever used. A group of starfighters, X-Wings usually, heads directly towards the defense line guarding a capital ship. At the last second, the X-Wings disengage, veering around and away. Rather like what our Preybirds just did. Exactly as our Preybirds just did, Pellaeon nodded. The defender's natural reaction, of course, is to assume the attackers are attempting a flanking maneuver and veer to follow and engage. But what they don't realize until it's too late is that a group of A-Wings has been flying directly behind the X-Wings, hidden by the X-Wings themselves and their drive glow. By the time they spot that second wave, they're too far out of line to block them, and the A-Wings have a clear run through to the now undefended ship. Clever enough, Artif said. I can see why you wouldn't want to use it very often, though it certainly worked well enough with the proton torpedoes playing the A-Wing's role. What does this have to do with Bella Bliss? Pellaeon smiled tightly. I was at the battle where he invented it. Artif blinked in surprise, and then he too smiled. In other words, it's not a tactic he'd be fooled by. Not a chance in the galaxy, Pellaeon agreed. But with those Corellian markings, I'd say someone worked very hard to make us think it was him. Artif sobered. Someone from the Empire? Or someone from the New Republic, Pellaeon said. We know there are factions on our side who don't want peace. I imagine they have their counterparts on the other. Probably, Artif said. So what do we do now? Whoever ordered that attack wanted us to think Bella Bliss was behind it, Pellaeon said. The small size of the forces, plus the quick and unashamed disengagement, implies he didn't really care whether or not he actually inflicted any damage. His purpose, therefore, must have been to drive us away from here before Bella Bliss could arrive. And so we stay? So we stay, Pellaeon agreed. At least a while. Yes, sir, Artif. Yes, sir. Artif pursed his lips. You realize, of course, that our unknown opponent may not give up this easily. He may attack again. Pellaeon turned again to look out at the fiery debris. Let him try. To be concluded. And that ends Specter of the Past. The next book will be Vision of the Future. This is a duology. It is not a trilogy. So there are only two books in this series. I have been debating whether I should do a concluding thoughts video on this series. I didn't actually provide a lot of commentary in the chapters of this particular book because, to be honest, I only read this duology one time. And that was when the books were originally released. So it has been, I guess, 27 years since I have actually read this story. Um, I remember the important bits about it, but I didn't remember the fine details. There are also some thoughts that I thought might be better discussed after we either finished this book or the series. And a lot of that has to do with my thoughts on how um, the ineffectiveness of the Republic begins to be shown in the EU, contrasted against how they have shown it in Disney's version of Star Wars, and also relating that to some current events. So let me know if you would like to have that kind of a video after this book, or if you would prefer that we jump straight into the next book and then I do my commentary when we conclude the series. Let me know what you think. I hope you guys enjoyed this book. We should be starting the next one probably within the next day or two. But again, let me know what you think. Hope you're all doing well. Talk to you again real soon.